Legend of Total War here, and today we're doing another Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires campaign review, this time revisiting Karl Franz. So just like with Balthasar Gelt, Karl Franz got a bit of a facelift with the Thrones of Decay DLC, and that has enhanced his campaign and allowed him a few more tools in order to deal with the numerous threats that he has to deal with within the Empire, because not only does Karl Franz have to worry about managing his own territory, he also has to sort of manage all the other Elector Counts territories with the Imperial Authority mechanic. Now, all the other Empire factions have access to the Imperial Authority mechanic, but it only activates once they actually have territory within the Empire. So, for example, Balthasar Gelt doesn't start off with this having any impact on him whatsoever. This only impacts your territory that's within the Empire. Now, for Karl Franz, that's going to be the bulk of your campaign. For Balthasar Gelt, well, it depends on the decisions that you make. It'll also massively impact on Elspeth von Draken, which is a big difference to his campaign previously, because having an ally directly in the south here is very useful. Now, if we bring up the previous video that I did, so this was made January 22nd, 2023, we can notice a couple of key differences just looking at the very first screen here. So, obviously, the Imperial Authority mechanic has been reworked, where this used to be a obtainable resource that you would use to spend on dilemmas or to obtain confederations with the other Elector Counts. Now, the Imperial Authority mechanic has no real bearing on confederations. Instead, you use your electoral machinations with Unify, which all of these can be upgraded in his tech tree, and you of course retain your diplomatic talks, which at the beginning of the campaign only allows you to talk with other Imperial factions, but as you research the Conclave of Light, you will then be able to talk to the High Elves, Kislev, Bretonnia, and Cathay factions, allowing you to negotiate with them. Now, this mechanic here is still very much a carbon copy of what the High Elves have always been able to do, just not quite as good, because the High Elves are able to negotiate with anyone, whether it be rogue factions or Warriors of Chaos. They can use their influence with anyone, whereas the Empire will only use diplomatic talks with order-tied factions, essentially. And then over here with Emperor of the Empire, all the Emperor decree actions are upgraded. And these are some pretty significant buffs to this already powerful mechanic when the time comes. Some of the most impactful ones are things like Open the Gate. So when this one's upgraded, instead of 1 population surplus, it goes up to 2. So being able to just massively grow your key provinces as quickly as possible, utilizing your prestige, is a big enhancement on the prestige mechanic, where previously it was just a resource spent on the dilemmas for the most part, and then there was like a very large expenditure later on in the campaign. Although I think in Warhammer 3, when it was ported over, it was kind of bugged for a little while, but for the majority of Warhammer 2, you had a dilemma that cost between like 10 or 12,000 prestige. That gave you some global bonuses. I'm actually not entirely sure if you still get that, but whatever the case is, prestige is now useful for the entire campaign, whereas previously, after you had conquered the Empire, prestige was basically useless, because it was only useful for negotiating with the other Imperial factions. But all of this will be useful. So Open the Gates, it doesn't matter if it's just an Imperial settlement or a settlement that you've conquered somewhere else. Being able to just grow your regions really quickly is very important. Especially in like red territory, if you intend to hold on to those, because otherwise they tend to grow fairly slowly. Being able to recruit units instantly is very useful. Being able to boost your allies with the send aid can be useful, except for the fact that they're considered minor factions. Now, the way that they work is that minor factions basically always lose to major factions, even if they've got the balance of power in their favor, because the game is geared towards minor factions being overrun by major factions. So the only time using Send Aid is really useful is to use it on Wissenland and Nuln. Otherwise, anyone that you send this to, you're basically just delivering free experience and loot money to whoever's fighting them. It might soften them up a little bit more, but for the most part, this isn't going to be impactful whatsoever on any of the minor factions, especially if you're playing on the higher difficulties. It's just an unfortunate sort of consequence of how they try to inorganically make sure that the major factions don't get wiped out by minor factions. It's just that makes it not particularly useful for them. However, it does increase their fealty. Now, fealty is not as useful as it used to be, because once you've upgraded the Emperor's Decrees, Unify, it doesn't matter if they're 10 fealty or not. You can just force them to confederate. The only real, I guess, value of having fealty is to just make sure that they don't cause a secession on you, which at the end of the day, it's not really that big of a concern for Karl Franz, because these guys here, with the exception of Whistlein and Nuln, will not put up that much of a fight. So you really don't need to kowtow very much to the other elect accounts at all. You can bully them a hell of a lot more now than you used to be able to. So previously with Karl Franz, it was really important that you get in there and defend them as much as you can. And now it's more like, they're there and you can use them, and if they get into trouble, well, screw them, basically. And if they want to rise up against you, well, also screw them. You've got the power, they don't. You've got the authority, basically, thanks to this mechanic here. And of course, if you want to keep them in power, you absolutely can do that. You're still able to capture a territory and then hand it back to its rightful inheritor, but it's entirely up to you, giving you more options throughout your campaign. So we're able to also declare war on elect accounts without suffering fealty loss. So that was something that you weren't able to do. You basically had to, weren't able to do previously, but you had to wait for like a dilemma to occur. So that's useful if you don't want to confederate them, you just want to kill them, and that way the other elect accounts don't get annoyed at you. And accumulating a lot of prestige is really not difficult, because you'll be able to get quite a bit of it passively, and just as you fight battles, you will get more prestige. Yeah, so that no longer will you just accumulate 100,000 prestige and just have nowhere to spend it. So Call to Arms over here, increasing local recruitment capacity. Using this one, Call to Arms, in conjunction with Conscription, basically allowing them to actually work together. Inquisition, making able to just rid yourself of corruption straight away, super useful, especially considering you have corrupting influences within the Empire. Being able to just get rid of all of the Nurgle corruption or all of the vampire corruption from whichever angle they're coming at you, that's really bloody handy, especially if it's causing you massive problems. And then over here, all elect account state troops will be replenished instantly in elect account state troop recruitment. So considering that Karl Franz boosts those units by an absolute ton now, being able to just pump in some prestige and get those units instantly instead of having to wait 15 turns for a new one to show up. It varies as well, because depending on your imperial authority, it does affect the replenishment time. But it will be especially useful if the replenishment time is quite bad, and then you're just using this to instantly replace it. But that being said, it does have a fairly long cooldown. So you've got a lot of options here in terms of what you can do now with the Karl Franz campaign. Also, you start off with Helmgart, where, if we go back to the video over here, we can see here that previously the player was required to launch a pretty risky attack fairly early on Helmgart, so it does kind of make the campaign a bit easier, at least to begin with, being able to just sort of not have to deal with that. But on the flip side, it does deprive Karl Franz of quite a bit of experience early on. Now, that being said, you could always just get that experience by fighting someone else. There's plenty of enemies within the Empire. You know, you're going to have Kazrak One Eye take out Boris Toddbringer pretty damn early. That's just about guaranteed. You've got the Barrow Legion. They're almost certainly going to capture Marienburg. Grom the Paunch is almost certainly going to make his way up this way. Vlad is almost certainly going to make his way to Vertbad. Festus is almost certainly going to take out Ostland and Hockland very early on, if not also Talabakland. Draika is a birch, so you got to take her out as quickly as you possibly can. So there's loads of potential enemies that you can take on. Now, another great thing about the Empire campaign is really no two campaigns are going to be the same, because of how wildly different the RNG can be for him. Things can just... Your starting opponents, you know, beyond this guy here, will vary differently just on random factors. Sometimes Kazrak needs to be dealt with first. Sometimes it needs to be Heinrich Kemmler. Sometimes it needs to be Grom the Paunch. And so with this campaign here, it's really important that you just are alert and keep an eye on what's going on and constantly react. It's a very reactive campaign. You need to react to all the threats that's coming in and make sure you clamp down on them really hard. But luckily now you've got some really good tools to work with. Overall, this is a really good campaign. I don't think it's quite as fun as Balthazar Gelt's campaign, so I'm going to give it like a 8 out of 10. And I would not really recommend this as the starter campaign unless you're playing on like easy difficulty. There are much easier campaigns to have as a starter campaign, but I think that they put it as a starter campaign largely because this is a very popular campaign. But if you're just starting off with Total War Warhammer 3, my recommendation would be to start off with Tyrion. It's way easier, way more forgiving campaign. The factions rosters work very similarly. It's just you don't have nearly as many critical threats to your empire as early as what Karl Franz has to deal with. But that being said, if you're looking for a challenging campaign, Karl Franz has definitely got one there for you. But yeah, it's giving you a lot of tools to work with. So anyway, I'm going to give this one an 8 out of 10. Let me know in the comments below what you think of Karl Franz's campaign and whether you agree or disagree with my assessment here. But overall, I'm really happy with the rework that Creative Assembly did with Karl Franz, and I think this is a really solid campaign. But personally, I prefer Balthazar Gelt just because of the absolute mayhem that ensues with that one. Anyway, that's the end of this one. Appreciate you guys, and we'll see you next time.